Holly. Her talk is the genetic anomaly of the 21st chromosome.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're going to learn something, I think.
Yeah.
We always learn something. So thank you.
Okay, before I start, I do want to say though, I know I'm very nervous, but if I get emotional, it's just because it's about my daughter and it is our life. And so sometimes, like when you spoke, it gets you out of nowhere. So I'm very sorry if I do. Oh, Daly's ready for it. All right, the genetic anomaly of the 21st chromosome. Imagine you're sitting in a hospital bed and your baby's been whisked away to the NICU. An on-call pediatrician walks in and just starts talking. He says things like, the baby has curved pinky fingers, small nipples, webbed toes. And then his voice kind of just trails off. You're not really sure what's going on, but then all of a sudden he says, your baby has Down syndrome. That was how I received the diagnosis for my minute-old daughter of Down syndrome. I was in shock, and I immediately began to cry. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of emotions and chaos, and we began to learn what our new normal would be raising a child with Down syndrome. Nixon is now 13 and thriving, but the minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months after her birth were a trying and defining time in my life. You see, I had no idea what Down syndrome even was. I had only been exposed to someone with Down syndrome maybe a handful of times in my life, and I didn't understand how it happened or what that meant for our family to come. I'm not an expert nor medical professional, but instead I am just a mother here to speak to you about the genetic anomaly of Down syndrome. Together we're going to take a look at what Down syndrome is and how it genetically happens, statistics on the condition, available fetal testing and screeners, along with symptoms and common characteristics. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder associated with physical growth delays, characteristic facial features, and mild to moderate developmental and intellectual disability. Down syndrome is the most common chromosome-related condition in the United States. The CDC estimates 5,700 babies are born in the U.S. every year, which is about 1 in every 640 babies. There are approximately 200,000 people in the U.S. currently diagnosed with Down syndrome. There are 3 forms of Down syndrome: trisomy 21, mosaic, and translocation, also known as Robertsonian. Each has a different cell division abnormality. My daughter Nixon was diagnosed with trisomy 21. With trisomy 21, each cell of the body has 3 separate copies of the 21st chromosome, resulting in 47 chromosomes. About 95% of people with Down syndrome have trisomy 21. Mosaic is when some of the cells have 3 copies of the 21st chromosome and the remaining cells have only 2 copies. Individuals with mosaic have fewer symptoms or features of the condition, and mosaic only accounts for about 2% of all Down syndrome diagnoses. The last 3% is translocation, or sometimes referred to as Robertsonian. Instead of there just being a 3rd copy of the 21st chromosome, a whole or portion of that chromosome has attached to a separate chromosome. This form can also be hereditary, and although not always. Now that we know why it happens, let's take a look at how it happens. The 21st chromosome is the smallest of all of the chromosomes. Due to this factor, a pregnancy can be carried full term with the abnormality. Often a chromosome with any other genetic defect will result in incompatibility of life. It is estimated that 40 to 75% of all miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities. Although the exact cause of Down syndrome is unknown, there are some factors that have been identified that may attribute to the anomaly. The Mayo Clinic has advised these risks to include maternal age, translocation genetics, and having a previous child with Down syndrome. Advancing maternal age increases chances of giving birth to a child with Down syndrome because the eggs mature, therefore it's at a greater risk of an improper chromosome division. The National Institute of Health statistically advises that 1 in 1,250 for a 25-year-old mother, 1 in 1,000 at age 31, 1 in 400 at age 35, and 1 in 100 at age 40. However, 80% of babies born with Down syndrome are born to women under the age of 35, because women under the age of 35 are having more babies than women over 35. Next, yeah, right. Next to parent being a carrier of the genetic translocation for Down syndrome, as I mentioned earlier, also known as Robertsonian, where the third chromosome has attached to another separate chromosome, the parent would not have any diagnosis of Down syndrome. They would just be a genetic carrier of the mutation and could provide it to their child. The third risk factor is to have had a previous pregnancy that resulted in a fetal or birth diagnosis of Down syndrome. Myself, for example, I would have a much higher risk because I am over the age of 35 and I have previously had a child with Down syndrome. Down syndrome occurs in all people of all races, religions, and economics levels. There is nothing we can do to prevent or avoid having a child with Down syndrome. However, there are several options for prenatal Down syndrome screening. These include chorionic villus sampling, or CVS, amniocentesis, and precutaneous umbilical blood sampling, or PUBS. I personally opted to skip screening tests as I was not necessarily at risk, and I had just given a birth to a typical child with no chromosomal abnormalities, and our family had no history of genetic anomalies or complications. CVS can be completed at 9 to 11 weeks by taking a sample of the placenta. Amniocentesis is when an amniotic fluid sample is taken at 14 to 18 weeks, and PUBS is done at 18 to 22 weeks by taking a fetal blood sample through the umbilical cord. Afterbirth diagnosis is done through physical screening and infant blood sampling. Now let's take a look at some of the common features and characteristics of those with Down syndrome. Children and adults with Down syndrome have distinct facial features, common facial traits, and similar health concerns. Physical traits can include a flattened face, lack of nose bridge, short or webbed neck, poor muscle tone and loose joints, short stature, small ears, hands, feet, and brush field spot in the iris of their eyes. Intellectual and developmental disabilities include mild to moderate cognitive delay, language and speech delay, short and long-term memory loss, with gross and fine motor delay. Additional health conditions or concerns include congenital heart defects, hearing loss, obstructive sleep apnea, infertility, epilepsy, and leukemia. Not all people with Down syndrome have the same symptoms or characteristics. It is common, though, to recognize someone with Down syndrome by their physical features. Even though they can all vary, the physical traits are very distinct and only associated with Down syndrome. For example, my daughter has several common facial features associated with Down syndrome. She has a smaller head, small ears, she has monolids, brush field spots in her eyes, a flattened bridge of the nose, and her mouth turns downward. She also has most intellectual and developmental delays associated with Down syndrome. Nixon has had to endure several health conditions and concerns over the years, including congenital heart defects at birth, severe heart dysplasia, obstructive sleep apnea, alopecia, hearing loss, and more. With early intervention beginning at birth through to current, Nixon has been able to make great strides, allowing her to live a happy and full life. Coming full circle, I've been able to share with you what Down syndrome is, how it can genetically happen, statistics and screeners available for expecting parents, and common traits, characteristics, and health conditions associated. Down syndrome is an extremely life-changing diagnosis for a parent, but when you take the time to understand what has happened, and there is no one thing to blame, and the child will be able to live a life as full as your own, you can see all the beauty that comes with it. I believe it is important to remember that we are all just human. We like to say that Nixon is our homie with an extra crummy. Thank you. Any questions for me? If not, that's okay too.
I certainly didn't know there was 3 kinds.
Yes.
And how chromosomes were involved. That's
I mean, the only one that's really that different is mosaic, because you can have, I know a girl that lives in the valley and she is like 22, she's married, she drives, she went to aesthetic school, so she has just, you can't really tell. I mean, I didn't know off right away that she had it because her physical facial features, you're kind of like, something isn't there, quite there, but cognitively, she's there. She's all there. So, yes.
What kinds of activities does your daughter do? Like, is she involved in sports? Is she
So
involved in-
Nixon unfortunately had severe hip dysplasia.
Oh.
So when they didn't find it till she was late onset walking. So she was over the age of 2 before they figured it out. At that point, she had to go to Shriners. They did the casting that they would normally do on an infant. It failed. So then we had to wait for her growth plate to close. And she was actually, her specific case was very uncommon, and they had to like take it all the way to Boston Children's and then figure out what the surgery would be. And at that point, only one person had ever had the surgery. But she had to wait till she was 8 for her growth plates to close. And then I waited a little bit longer because, you know, it was a big deal. And when she had the surgery, it was like a 50-50 chance if she would walk again or not. And so we waited a little while longer. She wasn't allowed to participate in any sports at that time because of that, and then also because the way that their neck can be, it is considered webbed, so it shortens, but also they can dislocate their neck and not know. So they have to wait for everything to kind of like mature, basically, to make sure. And she did have situations where hers was not always aligned properly, so they wanted to avoid, obviously, that in the beginning. But yeah, so she had a big old surgery in 2021, I think. Yeah, 2021. So it was in April, and then she didn't learn to walk again until, I guess she went to school in September with a walker, and then by about January she was done with that. So, yes, John.
I think this would be very challenging for myself. What are the other side, what is some of the aspects of the other side of challenging? How have you been blessed
Have I been blessed? Oh my gosh.
by
Okay.
your daughter's condition?
So, I don't know that I've necessarily been blessed by the condition itself. However, I learned how important my family and friends were when Nixon was born. I had just had Rylan, who's here, and he was 1. And I had her 3 weeks later. And we didn't know. And it was a very traumatic birth. And then that happened, so it was very caught off guard. But I have wonderful family and friends. Auntie was actually in the room when they told me, and it was like I explained it is exactly how it happened. I had no one in there. It was me, her, and one other person, and everyone else had chased the baby to the NICU. And he just blurted from the other side of the room. It was the most uncomfortable thing. But in that moment, my whole tribe of people came together and to help me take care of Nixon. And she was in the hospital about 6 weeks. We got to come home. I had to go immediately back to work at that point. So my mom, my aunt, my mom's best friend, her mom, everybody stepped up to take care of her because Nixon had major health concerns when she came home. She was on a feeding tube. She had the chance of being on oxygen. Some of the time she had to wear certain monitors all the time. It was a lot. So if anything, it brought our family that much closer together, and for me to realize who was so important in my life and who at that point wasn't, and who was gonna have my back. And I have been blessed ever since. Also, having Rylan first was a blessing, I'm not gonna lie. He's the most mature, most great child ever, and he has helped. I don't know how I would have done it without him, honestly, day to day living with me to care for her. It's difficult. So, that's it. All right, well, thank you guys.